I just want to talk for a few minutes on the Crucible Experience. The Crucible Experience. Tony Robbins, who is one of the greatest coaches, one of the great leaders for corporations and leading, training their people to be the best that they can be. Someone who's made multi-million dollars doing this kind of work. He said that burials in your life are crucibles that are there to make you stronger. I heard another person say that America is not where she ought to be now, that she has not arrived, that she is still in the crucible. And when she come out of the crucible, she would be a fusion of races and people and things. In fact, she said it may be the first superwoman. Mordecai Johnsnon, who was the dean of theology at Howard University for years, and actually helped form and make Howard what it is today, was one of the greatest theologians in African American history. But Mordecai was somewhat funny. He didn't like preachers who were not trained. He would have had a hard time with Paul. If Paul had come to him and said, well, I didn't go to Harvard, Mordecai would have had a hard time putting him in his pulpit. Because he thought that every preacher ought to be trained somewhere before they began to preach God's word. Now, we're going way back to his day where there were preachers who were preaching without licenses, without being sent by churches, and Mordecai just couldn't stand that. But what Mordecai said that, he said when the Negro, and that's the term that he used, he said when Negroes cry from their pain and hurt, and when they lay their petitions down for justice and righteousness and fairness toward the American people, they are asking them, or we are asking them, to arouse the crucible of race relations that has divided our nations. And so I say that to somewhat introduce you to what the crucible really is. A crucible is pretty much I guess you can call it a vessel, you can call it an experience, you can call it something that you are dealing with in your life, something that shapes you. And so in our postmodern, post-everything world, we have come to call those experiences, those things that shape us and mold us and make us and help us and work with us and break us and help us and hinder us and keep us from getting to our destination. All those experiences and combinations, we have come to call them the crucible. It's like being in a refinery. And the word crucible, and from some definition, comes from medieval times, And during medieval times, there were people who used to try to melt metal to make gold. And they would do that in a crucible. So in other words, you have a hot tank, a hot boiling water, whatever, it's hot, and you try to use it to make gold out of it. And so for us as Christians, we have to understand that there are times in our lives when God himself would put us in a crucible. When we go through changes in our lives, when we go through things that we don't understand, things that we can't figure out, things that we had no idea would happen to us in our lives, things that bother us so much. We don't understand them. Sometimes I want to suggest that God has put us in the crucible. And some of you all right now are experiencing the crucible. You're going through something that you really don't understand. You don't have any answers for. You don't know where it came from. You don't know how it came up. You don't know where it came from. But you are experiencing a crucible. Going through something where when you come out, you'll be better than you were when you went in. And that's God's way of shaping us, of refining us. And see, sometimes we need to be reshaped. We need to be refined. We need to look back at our experiences. We need to look back at our accomplishments and look back at what we have done and determine for ourselves. Has the experiences we had in life made a difference in our lives? Some people can have one experience after another and it makes no difference. They're still the same person. They can go from drug to drug and it will make no difference. From woman to woman and it makes no difference. They're in a crucible and don't realize that what God is trying to do is to shape you and mold you and make you and turn you into somebody. And so when we are in the crucible, what you and I have to discover is what we are made of. When we come out, we ought to determine how tough we are. Do we have any stamina? See, some people can't stand anything. They just can't take it. They're just too weak. And that's why God has to refine us. You know, refinery is something that's hot. And all of us are in or have been in a hot situation. Something that's hot all around us. In fact, somebody might be claiming it's hot in here now. Well, you're in a crucible. So we have to understand that for those of us who call ourselves Christians, that the crucible experience is a trial and a test. It's a point of deep self-reflection and something that forces us to determine what matters most in our lives. Somebody say, we do those things that matter most in our lives. So if you wash your car every day, then washing your car is what matters most in your life. If you're married and you don't see your wife that much, then you're working all the time, then work is more important than your wife. You might as well admit it. You don't want to go home. I think I do overtime today. You in the crucible. The experiences that you are going to gain from that will help you make the right choice, hopefully, that God will have you to make. A crucible is a place, again, of severe tests and trial. And let me tell you this, the choice that you make today can change your life forever. And some people don't get that. The choices you make today will have an impact on your life for the rest of your life. It can be something that you can never get rid of. And that's why we need God to lead us in this crucible that we find ourselves in, that I believe that he's put us in. Now, am I saying that God has put us in a crucible of cancer, of AIDS, or some disease? No. I'm talking about life experiences that make us who we are. The things we need to succeed in life. That's what I'm talking about. Those experiences that are unique for success and for living out our cultural relativism. That's what I'm talking about. And so we have to be able to understand that test that God gives us helps us find the answer of who we are and whose we are. And you have to understand that you're going to be tested. You're going to be tested. Abraham, take thine son, thine only son, sacrifice him on Mount Moriah. Sometimes in this life, God is going to test you to see if you're ready for what you're doing. Are you the right fit? Are you the right person? Are you the right adjective that needs to be invoked in this situation? And sometimes when you leave the crucible, you find out that you're not. That you've been in the wrong place all that time. And you should have been somewhere else. Because you're listening to somebody else instead of listening to the voice of God. And so, what we'll see in this text as we develop a series on the Crucible Experience, what we'll see in this text is how God takes a 13-year-old, what some call child, anoints him to be the next king of Israel because he has had enough of Saul, the first king of Israel. And I'm going to tell you, there's some times when God has had enough of us. Amen. You can sit there and be quiet if you want to, but there are times when God has had enough of your mess. And he gets somebody else. And don't think you're not replaceable, because you are. And so am I. Everybody is replaceable. Nobody is at a point in their lives where they are so perfect that somebody else can't do what you can do. They may not be able to do it better, but they can do it. And so what we'll see with David is how God anoints this young boy to be king of Israel at a young age, and we will see how God shapes him and molds him and helps him and polishes him and lifts him and drives him and encourages him and give him power and strength and agility and makes him a man after his own heart, after God's own heart. It took 17 years for God to get David in a point where God wanted David to be. He put him in the crucible. The only way David could have survived is because of God's crucible. And we're all in it. Everybody in here is in a crucible. You're going through something right now that you must understand. That it ain't something that just happened. It's something that God does. And that's what I try to tell my young people sometimes. You don't understand the experiences that you're going through. You want to quit school. You want to quit college. But you don't understand what it is that you want to do. You have to understand the crucible. What you are going through is there to determine if you can handle it. Can you make it through it? Can you push your way through the crowd and say, if I touch the hem of his garment, I shall be made whole? Do you have that kind of determination? That's the crucible. That's the way you come out. Can I graduate from high school even though my teachers tell me that I'm a flunky? That I can't pass math, that I don't know science, I don't know English. Can I make it regardless of what somebody say I can't do? That's the crucible that you're in. Can I get this car that I want even though I don't have the money that I need to get it? It's a crucible that you're in and trying your best to get to that place in your life where God helps you through what God does understand some of life's challenges. We all challenge. Everybody in here has a challenge every single day. Our accomplishments are challenged. Our love lives are challenged. Our family life is challenged. Our churches are challenged. Everything we do in life is challenged. And here is this crucible that God puts us in to grow us, to challenge us, to embellish our character, to help us form our accomplishments and transform us into the leader, into the person that he wants us to be. And we have to take it. The bottom line is there's nothing we can do about it. Nothing. Because God has already spoken. You in it. I'm going to make something out of you. And you ain't coming out of this crucible until you are transformed in the way that I intend for you to be transformed. You can fight it all you want, but you ain't coming out. And so we will see how David's character would change as he enters the crucible. And again, it's a matter of what matters most to you. It's a question of your values and your own assumptions. And we make assumptions all the time. Everybody in here assumes something, whether it's right or wrong. Somebody said all assumptions are right. I don't know about that. Shaking your head said, no, it ain't. I'm not going to get into a philosophical debate about it, but I'm like you. I don't think all assumptions are right. You can't assume that somebody who grew up on the other side of what we call the railroad track with nothing can't be the next Barack Obama. You can't assume that. You make assumptions on people's lives that you don't even know where they are in their lives. The only thing you do is see them. And you make assumptions that they can't do it. Just like I did last night. And I said, you know, Pittsburgh can't beat Cincinnati. It's a minute and 43 seconds left on the clock. All they got to do is lay on the ball, and the game's over. And my assumptions failed me because the offensive coordinator called the play that ran the ball, and the guy fumbled the ball, and Pittsburgh got it. Assumptions are not always true. So the point is this, that when we've been in the crucible and when we come out, we're stronger, we're more courageous, we're more dedicated, we're more committed than ever before. At least that's the way it should be. I should be stronger because God has put me in the refinery and he's reshaped me, he's transformed me, and he's made me a better person. How many of you want to be a better person in life? Want to be better and not bitter? I want to be better. And I don't mind being in God's crucible. I don't mind the challenges that I have to deal with in my life. There's some things that I'd rather not go through. But that's life. You have to go through those things. And as we look out in our world, we see so much going on. So many crucibles that's out there now, where God is testing this nation and testing us, and we are trying to run away from it. So, what we'll see with David is how God changes him to be the king that he wants him to be. And the point is, as I mentioned, is that when you've been in the crucible and leave, you become more courageous, more dedicated and committed. It's like Paul saying in Romans 8, we are more than conquerors. How does he say that? Because he's been groomed and he's been fashioned and he's been refined. He's been in the crucible of God. When God met him on Damascus Road, God put him in this container. He said, that's all right. In a few months, you will be preaching to the Gentiles. You'll be doing missionary journeys. You'll be one of the greatest Christians ever walk the planet. You will write 2/3 of the New Testament when I get through with you. The crucible makes us stronger and better than we are today. And so in 1953, I think some of y'all in here are old enough to know about 1953. Arthur Miller wrote a book or wrote a play entitled The Crucible. And the play was basically written to detail the Salem witch hunts in the province of Massachusetts. Remember the Salem trials in the 1600s. And so he wrote it, it was written based on that, but when he wrote it in 53, he wrote it as an analogy as to what Joseph McCarthy and the U.S. government were doing to those they call communists. So it was an analogy to communism because the U.S. had almost branded everybody a communist. And if you all were back there, some of y'all would have been branded a communist too. Anybody who spoke out on anything was a communist. We had some of the greatest entertainers in the world, some of the greatest athletes in the world who had to flee this country because they were branded communists. Paul Robeson, one of the greatest entertainers in the world. Othello, one of the greatest plays ever made, performed by Paul Robeson, branded a communist. W.E.B. Du Bois, one of the greatest scholars and the first PhD graduate from Harvard University, branded a communist because he wanted to start an NAACP, a Nigerian movement. We had some of the greatest entertainers. James Baldwin, great writer, Go Tell It on the Mountain. And everywhere else. The Fire Next Time. James Baldwin, Giovanna's Room. James Baldwin had to leave this country so that he could make something out of his life because he had been branded a communist and was not allowed to come back into this country. And so what Arthur Miller does, he draws an analogy between the Salem witch hunts, which were killing innocent people because somebody accused you of being a witch. You know, if I point to Don Lyles and say Don Lyles is a witch, I saw him, yesterday performing some magic. They come after him. Just on my word. And so he makes this analogy because that's what McCarthyism was doing, the same thing. Taking innocent people and calling them communists. That's how we got in Vietnam. That's how we got there. Because of the Viet Cong, we got there to try to save the world from communism. It was like the little boy who told his teachers, he said, what do you think about creation? He said, I think creation is fine. What do you think about, God making Eve first and then, making man? He said, I see no problem with that. It could have been that way. There was nobody here to argue that. and he says, the only problem I have is that the dirt that's used for women can't be the same dirt that God would use for man. So there has to be a problem somewhere with the dirt. And so he says this Catholic priest came around and said that God had figured out a way, that man had figured out a way to create his own man. And the boy said, well, how did he do that? He said, he told God that he going to make his own man. And God said, well, go ahead.